Welcome to the first installment of Soji Zen Center's Mind, Body, Spirit series. I'm Anthony Nentetsu Yushak, a student at the Soji Zen Center and a licensed psychotherapist. Shuzen Roshi has asked me to discuss how Zen meditation and practice can help us deal with common psychological challenges more effectively. I deeply agree with Roshi that Zen practice has many incredibly positive implications for our mental health, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these benefits in greater detail and explore the practical application of Zen in our day-to-day psychological experience. Today we're going to cover 3 topics. First, I would like to discuss what it is about Zen meditation and practice that I believe is so deeply transformative to our psychological health. Next, I'll discuss some of the scientific theory that justifies the shift in perspective implied by Zen practice. Lastly, I'll introduce you to a Buddhist-inspired therapeutic framework that allows us to take advantage of this new mindset for the practical realization of our deeper values and an altogether improved sense of well-being. If you've ever picked up a book on Zen practice, you know that one of the first things Zen teachers stress is the importance of physical posture, keeping your back straight, your body stable, your hands in the cosmic mudra, and so on. Well, I want to talk to you about a different type of posture, the psychological posture implied by Zen practice. What do I mean when I talk about psychological posture? I'm talking about the way that we react to our internal, private experiences, our thoughts and feelings. If we pay close attention, we notice that our default psychological posture tends to be somewhat predictable and often less than flexible. We notice that there are a great deal, many rules that our minds follow dogmatically, especially when we're on autopilot. We take our thoughts and feelings very seriously, we construct narratives in an attempt to solve challenging emotions, and we deploy strategies designed to maximize pleasant thought and feeling states and minimize those which we have coded as negative or undesirable. In Zen practice, we're invited to cultivate a very different psychological posture, a posture of openness. This is implied by both the practice of Zazen itself and by the teachings imparted to us by Shuzen Roshi and other teachers during Dharma talks, interviews, and discussion groups. Shuzen Roshi often advises us to let go of our stories about our reality and instead experience reality itself without needless conceptualization or analysis. We're asked to hold our thoughts and feelings loosely, learn to drop our resistance to them, and simply return to the present. Shunryo Suzuki Roshi neatly summarized this posture when he said, "Leave your front door and back door open. Let thoughts come and go, just don't serve them tea." So why is this posture towards our thoughts and feelings so beneficial to our psychological health? To answer this question, we'll have to learn a little more about what thoughts and feelings are, where they come from, and our instinctive reflexes regarding these private experiences. Many of the most common psychological challenges, issues like anxiety, depression, trauma, or grief, are so disruptive to our lives because of the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that they generate within our body and the actions that we then take in an attempt to fix them. Let's use a recent and common manifestation of anxiety to demonstrate the point. Many people are anxious about the current COVID-19 pandemic. Perhaps even hearing that combination of words will generate a set of uncomfortable private experiences that we would typically label as anxiety. You might have thoughts about getting sick, losing your job, and what might happen to you if you can't afford to pay your bills. You might also have concerns about yourself or someone you love contracting the virus and the pain associated with a potentially serious illness. While these thoughts are taking place, chances are that you'll have some uncomfortable feelings or sensations in the body as well. Slightly more shallow breath, tightness in the chest, increased heart rate, or clammy hands. We have a habit of taking these thoughts and feelings very seriously, patterning our lives around them in an attempt to maximize what we consider to be more positive experiences and minimizing the negative ones. To be clear, it's not that these aren't serious concerns that deserve some degree of reflection and action. It's just that our minds tend to pose solutions that aren't particularly helpful to us. For anxiety, these solutions often include avoiding the situations that would generate these uncomfortable experiences, using substances to take the edge off, distracting ourselves, suppressing our feelings in a way that damages our psychological integrity, or using what Shuzen Roshi calls fixers in an attempt to change the narrative around these thoughts and feelings. The instinct to buy into our private experiences and slip into problem-solving mode is deeply conditioned, but there's a fundamental question that we don't often ask. Should we? Or should we instead be more skeptical of our thoughts and feelings and try to find a more skillful path forward? From a scientific perspective, the evidence is clear. Skepticism of our private experience is indeed warranted. Our thoughts and feelings are calibrated for a very particular value, survival, in a very particular environment. Think the ancient hunter-gatherer cultures on the savannas of Africa. Our lives today really couldn't look more different. Culturally, we're no longer content to simply survive our experience on Earth, and the incredible technological developments over the past millennia have aided in the construction of a modern living environment that our ancestors with almost identical biology could never even have dreamed of. This monumental shift in culture and environment has scrambled our intuitions and left many of us struggling to make sense of the modern global community. Our minds aren't evolved to see anything like objective truth, and so they take endless unhelpful shortcuts to advance an outdated agenda. If you've ever been in therapy, you've probably heard of these shortcuts referred to as cognitive distortions, and there are a ton of them. Black and white thinking, fortune-telling, mental filtering. Our thoughts and feelings are in many ways the product of a body that doesn't know what century it's in, and many of our psychological challenges can be explained as an inability to effectively adapt to our modern environment. So we have some compelling reasons to hold our thoughts and feelings loosely. And Zen practice cultivates an open psychological posture that encourages that very same skillful adaptation. Meditation allows us to be more aware of and open to our internal experience, witnessing the impermanent and fleeting nature of these phenomena as we draw ourselves back to the present again and again. Through such a practice, we gradually learn to hold our thoughts and feelings in a flexible manner, freeing us from the habit energy of our past and granting us the space necessary to move through our lives with freedom. As we consider how Zen practice can generate a more flexible mindset, another really critical question begins to take shape. What should we do with it? We've learned that our superficial thought and feeling responses aren't a deeply reliable guide for our behavior, but we're still tasked with having to make important decisions, interact with others, and determine the direction of our lives. How can we avoid the pitfalls of our biology and move forward in a meaningful way? In my experience, some of the most thoughtful and effective strategy for answering this question comes from a Buddhist-inspired psychotherapeutic approach called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. ACT is a way of understanding human experience that emphasizes the importance of pivoting from a life governed by thought and feeling to a life in which we instead take direction from our values. Now, while the notion of living your values might sound a bit idealistic at first, it actually implies a deeply practical shift. Turning away from the constant evaluation of what's true or what's right, and instead asking a much more meaningful and instructive question: what matters? And as we'll see, the current public health crisis provides us with the critical opportunity to make this all-important shift. Although the whole of ACT therapy contains an extensive catalog of skills, strategies, and tools, the approach is often neatly summarized in 3 core instructions: open up, get present, and do what matters. Opening up means to see our thoughts as thoughts, that is, language in the mind, and our feelings as feelings or sensations in the body, and not buying into them in the way that our instincts so often compel us to. We're invited to drop the struggle with our experience in a manner that minimizes our internal resistance and frees us to take more intentional action. Zen meditation is, of course, all about opening up to our experience, but there are a number of other techniques as well. One of my favorites is to make space for difficult experiences by breathing into them. First, get a sense of what the challenging emotion your experience looks like in the body. Maybe it feels like a cluster of knots in your stomach or a current of electricity running through your chest. Notice any aversion that you might be feeling to this uncomfortable sensation in the form of bodily tension or judgmental thoughts. Then take a deep breath And imagine your body expanding to include this sensation as you drop the struggle with your own thoughts and feelings, allowing them to take whatever space they need. The exercise calls to mind a metaphor once used by Shunryu Suzuki. If you want to pacify an agitated bull, you wouldn't confine it to a tiny stall. You would want to provide the bull with as large a field as possible. Making space for challenging emotions follows that same logic. Getting present is the second pillar of ACT therapy, and it means using your physical senses to make consistent and intentional contact with the present moment. Now, it's hard to talk about present moment awareness without it sounding like a cliche, but the importance of this step really can't be overstated. The present moment is, in fact, all we really have. The past is a memory, the future hasn't happened yet, and still most of us spend very little time here in the present moment at all. Instead, we spend the vast majority of our time scrutinizing past decisions or attempting to anticipate our future circumstances. You probably won't be surprised to learn that such constant rumination is highly correlated with anxiety, depression, and a host of other difficult psychological issues. Getting present is the antidote to rumination. And once again, if you have a meditation practice or mindfulness practice, you're familiar with this idea. It's a habit that we can encourage using both formal or informal exercises. Seated meditation is a formal practice in that it requires you to set time aside specifically for the activity. Almost all types of meditation involve setting an intention to anchor our awareness to a particular object or activity, the breath being one of the most common focal points. We focus our attention on the breath, and at some point, our problem-solving mind will decide that this isn't stimulating enough, and our attention will wander. The instruction is to simply notice what's taken place and gently redirect our attention back to the breath. Informal meditation practices are just as important. These activities cultivate the same intentionality and awareness implied by seating meditation, but differ in that they're available to us all the time, even in the midst of our busy and complex modern lives. For informal practice, we simply identify our task, use our senses to anchor ourselves and our attention to that task, notice when our mind begins to wander, and gently redirect the mind back to the present. What I love most about this is that opportunities for informal practice are available to us at every turn, whether we're cleaning the house, walking the dog, or driving to work. One of my favorite examples of informal practice involves cooking, which provides plenty of sensory stimulation for the mind to attend to. As you're cooking, you can draw your attention to the bright colors of the vegetables, the smell of the spices, or the sound of the water boiling. When you notice your mind ruminating, simply notice this and use your senses to bring your mind back to the present moment. The third pillar of ACT therapy invites us to do what matters. In this stage of the process, we're asked to identify what makes life meaningful to us and take committed action in the service of these values. A strong emphasis on values is unique to ACT among therapeutic approaches, and although the previous two stages are pretty familiar to anybody with a meditation practice, this third stage instructs us to employ the freedom of mind afforded by meditation to bring deep meaning to our lived experience and pave the way for a lasting and reliable sense of contentment and equanimity. To begin doing what matters, we first have to get a sense of who we are at a foundational level. We're invited to clarify our values by asking some thoughtful and reflective questions about ourselves and our deepest sense of meaning. There are plenty of these questions out there, but a few of my favorites are, if you weren't worried about anybody else's approval, how might you be living your life differently? If you were to ask those closest to you about your character, what types of things would you hope they might say about you? Who are your heroes, and why do you admire them? What sorts of things would you be willing to endure emotional or physical discomfort for? Questions like these help point us in the direction of what we believe truly matters. I'll often work with clients to distill their answers from these questions into core ideals like authenticity, loyalty, compassion, freedom, curiosity, or adventure. If we know what's important to us, we can take committed but flexible action toward provisional goals that are created using these insights. As we examine our values and think about taking action that can bring us closer into alignment with them, most people begin to notice a rather challenging pattern. Moving towards our values often generates difficult and uncomfortable thoughts and feelings. This isn't a coincidence, and we'll draw again from our shared current experience to generate an example. Right now, many people are having to reconfigure the manner in which they interact with one another as a result of social distancing guidelines. We can observe that adapting to the current moment with these new methods of communication implies some flexibility on our part as we move toward values of public safety, companionship, productivity, or financial security. However, demonstrating these values also generates challenging thoughts and feelings. And again, as we pursue our values, this will almost always be the case. We might have thoughts like, this technology is new to me, what if I can't operate it and look stupid? What if my meaning is misunderstood or misinterpreted? What if people don't like this electronic version of me as much? The familiar anxious sensations tend to arise as well in the form of the shallow breathing, increased heart rate, or general restlessness. In the midst of this challenging thought and feeling experience, it's very tempting to engage in avoidance for immediate relief and the illusion of control. We might cancel our planned teleconference, lie about our availability, or otherwise reject our deeper values in the interest of doing what feels good in the moment. Doing so provides a temporary sense of comfort, followed by a deeper sense of meaninglessness that accompanies the willful violation of our values. Instead, ACT therapy, assisted greatly by Zen practice, invites us to return to the message of acceptance and commitment. Open up, get present, and do what matters. We see these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings for what they really are, language of the mind and sensations in the body. We anchor ourselves to the present moment and carry ourselves compassionately in the direction of what matters most. Following the ACT model allows us to operationalize our Zen practice for the embodiment of ideals that allow for a fuller, richer life. We'll also find that doing so has incredibly positive implications for our mental health, as we are no longer forced into the same restrictive and avoidant behaviors that artificially limit our repertoire of available responses and drive us away from what we really care about. Locating the psychological flexibility promised by this approach is more important now than ever before, so I encourage everyone to start the process themselves. Open up by seeing how you might be buying into your thoughts and feelings about your situation, and practice dropping the struggle with them instead. Bring yourself to the present moment using your senses to anchor yourself in the only time that's truly available to you. And lastly, do what matters. Reflect on the ideals that you wish to represent in your life and move toward these values with commitment, flexibility, and compassion.